Welcome to Formed, where each week we navigate a relevant topic or question through honest conversations. We are three pastors with three different backgrounds on staff together at Irving Bible Church in Irving, Texas. We believe we are constantly being formed in the way of Jesus for the sake of the world, and we hope this podcast helps with that. So let's jump into this week's episode of Formed. Welcome back to another week of Formed. Barry's last week before sabbatical.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
It's happening.
Last week, we did a whole episode on the Sabbath, and in that episode, probably like 75% of the way through, Barry got to share a lot of the details on what sabbatical will look like, him dressing up as a monk, his travels.
The hair shirt and the rope belt.
All of it.
Hair shirt.
Barry, how are you nervous about what this podcast will be while you're out?
Yes. Well, the podcast, of all things that I'm stressed about, the
That's
podcast
not
isn't
it.
one of them.
Yeah.
You guys are going to be great, and we're going to have some great guests on. We've talked about some of the folks that'll be here in my absence. So podcast is great. Everything else, I am nervous about walking away from. And again, not because I don't trust the team. I trust the team implicitly. It's just that sense of like, I have to give up any illusion of control. And so I'm finding that more challenging than I think I would have anticipated. But I guess that kind of goes with the territory, or maybe that's just good old Dr. Control Freak for you.
If we don't get a Barry text over 3 months about at least one episode, I'll be disappointed. But I plan on using Barry's office the entire 3 months. We're going to throw parties in there for staff and have lunch and
Read all his books.
Read all of his books. It'll take us probably more than 3 months. But today we're going to talk about...
I have been getting all the books off of my desk before I go on
good.
podcast.
Okay.
On sabbatical.
Yeah.
So if I come back and there's books on my desk, I'm going to be mad. So
Or they're out of order.
You're going to have to deal with the...
That's what I'm going to do.
You're going to have to deal with the 8-wing, all right?
I will say there's been times I try to leave something on your
I know.
desk.
Yeah.
And there's just like, I don't even know, do I stack
Where
it
do I
on
put
top
this?
or do I don't know what to do with it.
Yes, our
But
podcast listeners don't know about Isaac's tendency towards being the prank puller.
Yeah.
And one especially popular prank among our staff is leaving random books from people we would not endorse somewhere in a person's stack of things.
And
Yeah.
it's been there for a couple days, and then you look around. How did that get there?
I feel like I might have... No, did I start this trend, or did I just get into it early
might
on?
have.
But then I think I might
you
have started
endorsed
it,
it, yeah.
and then it just is one of those things that snowballed on me and became a thing.
Just wait
and,
till you come
and
back.
I was kicking myself.
You're gonna have a whole
dear.
collection.
Oh no! How do we lock my office for 3 months?
No. All right, today we're gonna talk about a subject that is so prominent for everybody. I mean, it's inevitable. Conflict is inevitable. You're gonna have conflict in your life. Shocking, breaking news for everybody listening to this. But how we navigate conflict can change so much in our work settings, in relationships, in families, and everything. So let's just start off with this: a fill in the blank. Conflict is inevitable, but blank.
So my first thought, I took this as like one of the things, like, what's my first thought that comes to my mind when I think about that, fill in the blank. And it was, conflict is inevitable, but it's also an opportunity. Yeah. And it's an opportunity, if done in the right way, it can be healthy, and it can actually be good for a relationship. And so it's an opportunity to love, serve, to care for that other person by listening to their needs, understanding their perspective. It's an opportunity to bring glory to God by obeying and trusting God in the midst of navigating what could be a difficult situation, and what is the Lord calling you to in that situation. And then thirdly, it's an opportunity to see how God might be forming and shaping you to be more like Jesus by owning your part of the conflict, by seeing are there places where you're acting or saying things that are not in line with God's good desires for you, and God's using that to shape who you are and form who you are. And so in all these ways, I think it can actually be opportunities where God works in really powerful ways in and through us.
If we're going with like your very first sort of knee-jerk reaction, immediate response,
what would you
it's,
say?
Conflict is inevitable, but avoid it at all costs. So, my natural disposition, my default temperament is towards conflict avoidance. But I agree with you completely, right?
Yeah.
That conflict is inevitable, but what I wrote in was it can make you stronger. And in that in that sentence, the you there can be both singular and plural,
Yeah.
right? It can make you as an individual stronger, make you better. It can help you become more Christ-like, but it can also make the relationship stronger. It can make the relationship better by willingly sort of leaning in and engaging the hard stuff and saying the difficult things and hearing the difficult things. It can actually strengthen that relationship in ways that actually conflict avoidance, you don't actually get what you want in the end, right? That it actually erodes trust. It erodes that sense of connection. And so, yeah, I've managed to avoid the discomfort of the conflict, but it's come at the cost of the quality of the relationship. And so conflict is inevitable, but it can make you stronger, both you personally and you together in relationship.
Let's talk about some do's and don'ts of conflict, or navigating conflict. What's some like must? Like, hey, whenever you have conflict, you're navigating it with somebody. What are some of the must that, like, the do's? You got to do this while navigating it.
So a couple things I thought about was, one, I think navigating conflict involves a lot of humility. Involves humility before God, humility with one another. Because often the source of conflict is pride. Like, I'm right, you're wrong, or I want my way, and my way's better than your way, or whatever it is. So oftentimes there's some pride at the source of it. And so how can I enter into this conflict with humility, thinking about the other person, thinking about there's no way that you can navigate it well without relying on the Lord's wisdom, strength, empowerment, because it's calling you to love and to think about someone else more than yourself. And so I think there's humility that's involved, particularly humility before God and with one another. I think it involves loving the other person well by listening. And this is something that I really try to work hard at, because I don't think I'm naturally a good listener. And so it's something I've had to practice. Because when I listen, I'm listening oftentimes forming a response. And particularly if it's a conflict, I'm forming my argument. And so here's the 3 things why you're wrong, right? What you're saying is not correct. And here, let me give you my 3 bullets of why you're wrong. And it really changes the that dynamic if you're willing to listen to understand. So understanding a person's perspective, understanding how they're feeling, understanding even maybe what they're afraid of or what's behind some of their actions or thoughts or words and things like that. So loving the other person well by listening to understand, but then speaking the truth in love, because just as much as much as you want to understand that person, you also want to be understood. Being heard helps you feel like you're understood, and it helps you feel loved. And so how can you speak the truth in love? And what I mean by that is, how can you share your perspective? How can you share what's going on for you, how you're feeling in that situation? And where I've failed at this is by talking about the other person. So let's say it's something like, making you statements instead of making I statements. And it's really simple, and yet I have not done that well so often. I've seen where that's really taken the conflict in a bad direction. So maybe it's something like, you're always late. Well, there's lots of things wrong with that sentence. One, it's about the other person and that like black and white thinking that you're always or you're never. So you're always late. But what if instead of saying you're always late, I said something like, I feel like I'm not important, or I don't feel valued when you show up late. Well, that's different because I'm talking about me. And where I have not done that well is I've made it about the other person instead of sharing my perspective or how I'm feeling in that situation. And I'm making assumptions about why they did what they did and things like that. So speaking the truth in love, and then owning my part of it. What is my part to own? What do I need to, where do I need to examine my words and my actions and say, you know what, I failed there. I was wrong. That was sinful. And let me own that. Let me confess that. Let me repent of that and ask you for forgiveness. And then I think there are times where you can share your perspective and the other person can share their perspective, and you just aren't going to agree. And so there are times where you have to come up with maybe a creative solution, and make a compromise. Not compromise in terms of your biblical convictions or doing something that's not going to honor the Lord, but compromise in terms of where can you give and where can the other person give and where you can meet in the middle. So I think those are some things I think about.
That's good. Yeah.
I have a feeling you guys know me well enough to know where I'm going to go on this because I talk about it a lot, but you must remain defined and connected. Right. So this concept of differentiation, we've been talking a lot about as a staff. I suspect maybe at some point we'll even do an episode that's more focused on this particular topic of differentiation. But this has been part of the deep work that God's been doing in me over the course of the last few years. And a very simplistic way of understanding it, particularly as it relates to conflict, is you kind of have these two poles, a sense of self-definition and that sense of connection to the other. And our personalities tend to gravitate to one pole or the other, or we can certainly swing back and forth. But self-defined is, I'm going to tell you what I think, I'm going to speak my mind, I'm going to have boundaries, I'm going to maintain this sense of self-definition. Then on the other hand is that sense of connection. I want us to be close, I want us to feel connected. It's that sense of emotional connection. And so my tendency oftentimes is to the connected end of the spectrum. So I will lose a sense of self-definition for the sake of connection. But what happens is I actually don't get what I want, right? Because what I want is that sense of we are close, we are connected. And yet if there's a rift between us and I haven't actually spoken my mind, I haven't actually told you what I think, then we're not actually close, right? On the other hand, there can be the tendency to swing toward the pole of defined. And I mean, Sissy and I have talked about this enough to know like that her tendency is going to be I'm going to have a sense of definition. And if you don't like it, that's tough, right? A little sense of like dismissing the other person. Well, by her own self, like I feel like I'm talking about her while she's sitting down the sofa from me. Right? But we've had enough conversations around this to know. And when we have stuff that we've got to work through, if I come in compromising definition for the sake of connection, like she's not going to connect well with that. She wants me to come in like, tell me what you think. We need to talk about this. And I think, in the same way that that if there's that conflict that's there, we've got to hash it out, but we're not pulling away from each other, right? And so that's the work that we have to learn how to do is remain both defined and connected. And so recognizing the tendencies then we have in ourselves of like, okay, am I compromising defined for the sake of connection? That's not healthy conflict. Am I being defined to the neglect of connection? Well, that's not healthy conflict either. So you must remain both defined and connected. And that's cultivating that ongoing inner awareness, what's happening inside of me in the middle of what's happening between us.
I feel like you already answered like the don'ts of conflict. If you have any more, go for it. But
I have a couple more. One, I would say don't avoid it, because I think a lot of times that's what we do. Yeah. So something comes up and we just kind of sweep it under the rug or gloss over it, and inevitably that is going to come out. Resentment's going to build up, or it's just going to come out in another way. The other thing I would say, similar to don't avoid it, is don't run from it. So another thing I think that we often do is we can not only run from the conflict because we don't want to deal with it, but we can run from the relationship. We can ghost people. We can just distance ourselves. So that's something that I have done in the past, where I've distanced myself from someone because I don't want to deal with it and I'm done. And that's something I've had to work through. How do I stay connected while still remaining defined? And so don't run from it. I think, people switch churches because they don't want to deal with conflict. We go to all sorts of extremes. And then don't assume that you're 100% right and the other person's 100% wrong. That is rarely the case. There's often something in the middle there. So don't start from that posture. Give people the benefit of the doubt. I think the other thing, similar to what you said, don't just give in and okay, you're right, we'll just do things your way sort of thing. But because, again, that's never going to work out if you're not actually sharing, here's what I need, or here's how I felt, here's my perspective. So don't do that either. I think those are a couple things I'd say.
What I jotted down was, I think, similar to your 100% right, 100% wrong. the way I said it was, don't let your narrative get the best of you.
It's good.
Right?
Yeah.
That there are facts. This is what happened. And then there are narratives, the stories we tell ourselves about what happened.
Yeah.
And sometimes in the stories we tell ourselves about what happened, we make assumptions, we fill in blanks. A book that I first read this idea in had this scenario where these two guys met and they had a connection and exchanged information, and the other guy was interested in funding this project. And then the person that presented, kind of pitched it, didn't hear back. Didn't hear back for days, and he'd been told, I'm going to follow up with you. And so created this whole narrative about what happened, only to find out that the guy's phone got stolen or lost, and then somebody got onto the device, and so he had to start a new email. He lost all his contacts. Like, there was this whole reality to what happened, but the guy had created a narrative that led to anger and resentment. And so just being aware of, there's facts, this is what happened. There's narratives, the stories that we tell ourselves about what happened. And don't let your narrative get the better of you. Let's get together, talk this through, hash this out. What are the facts?
Yeah.
How do we process through in that way?
I think that's really good, because I'm often find myself asking myself the question, what's the story I'm telling myself? Because I made up a whole story about why Barry didn't call me back or text me back when I asked him this really important question, right? And it's rarely the case that my narrative is right.
I feel like I have this recurring theme of people using Barry didn't call me back or text me back
now I'm
as
just
an
never
example.
offended
And
by
now
it,
I'm
to
just
be
I
like,
make up
honest.
narratives
no.
about Barry all the time. I literally just did it on Sunday. I told Barb, this is probably not even good for the podcast, but I told Barb I did announcements on Sunday, and afterwards I was like, I feel like I have in my brain that Barry's sitting on the edge of his seat, just like his like, oh, what's this guy gonna say? What's this? He's such a wild card. There's no telling what he's about to say. I was like, I feel like he hates when I do this.
Oh, no.
And like we had this whole thing. I was like, it could be a false narrative, but it could be, And
It's the story you're telling yourself.
yeah,
Yep.
it's like, what's
Don't
the
let your narrative get the better of you, bro.
Yeah.
Barry narrative?
Yeah.
That's good.
The other thing that I think is really important is don't resort to name calling.
That's good.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, and this is whether it's in your marriage or certainly in the workplace or friendships, because you can never take those back as much as you can apologize for that. Like, and what happens is when we can't score points in the argument, like if there's a breakdown in our ability to actually sort of reason with each other, we wind up trying to score pain points, right? I can hurt you.
Right.
I am hurt, therefore I'm going to hurt you.
Yep.
And we use name calling, and boy, those names, those words, they stay with us.
good.
My wife has a story that she shares, not my story to tell, but enough just to say she's got a story of, when she was younger in a close relationship, and a word that was used that all these years later, right?
Still.
Like, it's still there. The hurt from that is still present and still fresh. As much as forgiveness may have been, offered, the sting of that word, the echo of it, down through the years stays. And I think that's just a reality that happens in our relationships. And so, by all means possible, when you find yourself in the midst of a conflict, you've got to avoid name calling.
Yeah, it's good.
How can you use scripture in the Bible when navigating conflict?
You go ahead.
So I had a few things that I jotted down that are just, I think, really helpful passages to think about as far as navigating conflict. And the first one that came to mind is in Romans 12, verse 18, where Paul says, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. And there's kind of three key phrases there. If it is possible, which is just an acknowledgement that living at peace is not always possible.
Yeah.
Like there's sometimes
times.
going to be conflicts that we're not able to come to a place of resolution. And that's unfortunate. That's tragic. That's not what we don't want to just default to, well, that's not possible.
Right.
If it is possible, just acknowledges it's not always possible. But second, as far as it depends on you. So it shouldn't be that it's not possible because I'm not willing to talk about it, or I'm not willing to lean in, or I'm not willing to engage the discomfort. Like Paul's saying, as far as it depends on you, that other person, they may not be willing to be reconciled or to deal in healthy ways with this conflict. But as far as it depends on you, as much as you have agency, live at peace with everyone. And man, that's a challenge to me because I just find myself at times where I'm going, okay, I really think they should make the first move.
Right.
I really think they should be the one to apologize but Paul puts the responsibility directly on me. As far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone.
Yeah, that's good.
I got a couple more, but what you got?
Well, I would just, two things I would say. One, I would say the way of Jesus is the way of love and humility. And I think that is just in our relationships, that's something to keep in mind. So I think of Philippians 2. The other passage that often comes up when we talk about conflict in Scripture is Matthew 18. And so I won't delve deeply into that. I don't know if that's on your list. But the one thing I would say is where I've often heard that passage it's been in the context of confrontation. And I actually don't think that's exactly what Jesus was talking about there. If you look at what he says before that passage and then after, it's really about gentle restoration. And so it's about speaking directly to someone about the issue, and yet doing it in the way the goal is always, as much as it's possible, restoration and reconciliation. And I think that's really important to keep in mind, that that's really ultimately what we're after. There are certainly times where that's not possible, but as much as we can, that's what we're trying to go after. Yeah. So that's what I'd add.
I had a couple more that I jotted down that I just think are helpful. When you said Matthew, I thought maybe you're going to Matthew 7, and that's the teaching in the Sermon on the Mount about the log and speck, right? Yeah. That how can you attend to the log, the plank in your brother's eye? I'm sorry, the speck in your brother's eye when you haven't paid attention to the plank in your own eye. So it's just that constant call to self-examination, right? That we've talked a lot on this podcast about how important it is that we have cultivate this hyper-awareness of what's happening inside of me. And so in that example, Jesus is saying, look, you can get fixated on the issue with the other and be oblivious to the issue in your own heart. And so we need to cultivate that sense of self-awareness even in the midst of conflict, especially when things can really get heated in a conflict of like, what's happening inside of me? Why is this generating so much heat inside of me? So the log and speck teaching from the Sermon on the Mount. I also thought about Ephesians 4. That whole passage is about the sense of unity of the community and how important that is. Do everything possible to maintain the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace. And then Paul unpacks through the remainder of the chapter how important that is and what it looks like and what to avoid and what to engage. That passage about unwholesome talk is really there about anything that's going to be hurtful or demeaning to another person, rip at the unity of the community. He says, do not grieve the Holy Spirit. And we sometimes think about that idea of grieving the Holy Spirit abstracted from the context. But the context is what grieves the Holy Spirit is actually when you're hurtful or you're not dealing with conflict in healthy ways within the unity of the community, within these relationships in your life. And then he comes kind of to the end of that in Ephesians 4:32. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as Christ forgave you. And be kind and compassionate, which isn't always easy when you're in a conflict. But what does it look like for me to try to show the character of Jesus, to demonstrate the fruit of the Spirit of kindness, compassionate, to suffer with another person, to feel something of what they're feeling? So to be kind and compassionate with one another and forgiving one another. That for us as Christians to engage conflict inevitably means a willingness to forgive when there's been an offense, when there's been a hurt. And Paul grounds that in the gospel. Forgive one another just as in Christ God forgave you. So it's, again, that reminder of, well, I am one who stands in need of grace. And as one who stands in need of grace, I can't refuse to offer grace toward the other who has offended me.
You said self-examination and this awareness of ourselves. There's a lot of resources out there, a lot of tools that help us with that. Why is it important for us to have that better understanding of ourselves? How do we use that when navigating conflict?
Yeah, this is one of the reasons why I geek out over all those tools. You guys know I'm a big fan. I mean, I love the DISC and the Myers-Briggs, and of course we've talked about the Enneagram, and all those are helpful as a tool that just helps me understand myself better, but also understand other people better, and just recognize that different personalities engage conflict in different ways. So if you use the DISC, a D is going to be that person who's going to be much more assertive, sometimes aggressive, sometimes that defined with the lack of connection. The I is going to be like, hey, let's just have a good time, let's all get along. The C is going to be somebody who is trying to let's deal with this rationally. The S is going to be probably more towards conflict avoidance. So you can think about the DISC, you can think about Myers-Briggs. I won't do all 16 types, but feeler perceivers are going to engage conflict very differently from thinker judgers.
Yeah.
And just recognizing that we do this differently helps us to avoid the expectation, you ought to do it like me.
Yeah.
Or I expect you to do it like me, and therefore when you don't, I'm offended by that. So then as that relates to Enneagrams, so one of the things I found really helpful, and we've talked about as a staff, is just recognizing different Enneagram types. They kind of break out into 3 groups as it relates to conflict, sometimes called harmonic groups. But you have what's called the positive outlook group. That's 9s, 2s, and 7s. And so those are the ones who are going to be to tend towards kind of a conflict avoidance, or let's look at this on the bright side. Let's try to reframe the conflict. Let's try to get along. Then you have what's called the competency group. That's 3s, 1s, and 5s. And they're saying, let's deal with this. Let's get down to the problem. Let's solve it. Let's be rational about it. Let's not let our feelings get in the way of good, healthy conflict. And our executive pastor Brian is an Enneagram 3, and so he said, yeah, so that means that we're the competency group and everybody else is the incompetency. It's like, no, Brian, that's not the way this works. But it's like, I want to do this right? I want to solve this. I want to fix it. Let's do it right. And then you have what's called the emotional realness group, previously referred to as the reactivity group. That word reactivity has kind of a negative connotation. It's just the recognition, like, these are people that when in conflict, the emotions are what's heightened. The emotions are what's going to come to the fore. And so that's 6s, 4s, and 8s who feel really strongly in the midst of conflict, need to let you know how I feel in the midst of this conflict, and kind of want you to feel the way that I feel. I talked to the staff about, Kim and I had this phone call a while back, and she's a part of this emotional realness group, and she was upset with one of our kids and kind of telling me all about it. And then by the end of the conversation, I was in trouble because I didn't feel as strongly about it as she felt about it, right? And so there's this sense of like, I feel strongly, I need you to know how I feel, and I kind of want you to feel the way that I do. So understanding those groups helps us to go, oh, this is what's happening in me, and this is what's happening in you, and we deal with this differently. How can we deal with it in a healthy way together?
Yeah. I think for me, where it's been helpful is understanding that everyone has a different motivation and even a different fear helps me see, because oftentimes, I have approached relationships and conflict thinking you should handle it the way I handle it. Or of course you do it that way because that's the way I know how to do it, right?
It's the way it's done. That's the right way to do it.
That's the right way to do it. And understanding that people do things very differently, and so recognizing that and then helping, that really helped me understand, well, no, they're not doing that because, they're mad at you or they're trying to get back at you or whatever. It's just the way they navigate things. And then also understanding that idea of motivations and fears has been really helpful to me to see, oh, that's why you're doing that. So then it sort of helps me put down my walls and enter into in a more empathetic way.
Yeah.
As far as like examples for you guys navigating conflict, how have you, and let's pick one, because you've shared a lot of like how you've not done it well or how you've done it well. If you could pick one, how you've done it well or how you've not done it well, what would you share?
I feel like trepidation of giving actual examples.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't have to give an
Yeah, I would have given an example. Yeah.
Name names.
No. So I have a specific example that just, my mind goes to pretty quickly in a place where I don't think I dealt with it very well. And in many respects, it was because I was really trying to own my part of it, my contribution, my failure. But I actually didn't say, hey, let me help you understand this is what happened, or let me help you see kind of the way I see it from my side. And instead, it wound up being a kind of a rift that just didn't really get repaired. And so that's one of those places where, again, in my attempt to be connected, right, to try to take ownership and apologize, and but I didn't actually speak my mind. I didn't actually say everything that was in my heart, and that actually really created a rift that never really has gotten fully repaired. There's been, forgiveness, but there's not been that opportunity to really reconnect relationally.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the places where I could say, where I failed is not really listening to the other person to understand their perspective. So I know how I feel, and I'm good at telling you how I feel. But to really listen to understand the other person's perspective. I think also the other part of that is I can tell you how I feel after the fact, but there's often times where I have not communicated what I need before. And then I'm assuming the other person knows that. So there's just unrealistic expectations or good desires that have turned into almost demands. But I've never communicated, well, here's what I need in that moment, or here's how I feel when you do that. And I'm expecting the other person to know, and that's just completely unfair. And so that's been a learning for me, to not assume that everyone does things the way I do them, and to try to talk about those things and then understand when that's just not a reasonable expectation that I should have.
Yeah,
It's good.
a lot of times it's like timing with me, or like at home with Barb. It's like I don't want to waste time of not working it out. So then I'm like, can we talk about it now?
Yeah.
Like
Let's just do it.
then we're just gonna waste time. Like, let's talk about it now. And she's like, no, I need more space to think about it. Or sometimes I can be a little bit more, with friendships, whatever. I tend to lean more towards, I'm just gonna be blunt. Like, I don't got time to, dance around something, and that's not always. It's like, there's an approach to things too.
Yeah.
You could be honest, but not.
Yeah.
And Barb needing more time doesn't mean she doesn't care.
Yeah.
It
Exactly.
just means she needs more time.
And
right?
almost every single time, that's exactly what it needed, was just time.
Yeah.
Coming back an hour later, and it's
Yeah.
like, hey, let's talk about this now. It's like, all right, you're right.
That's maybe the other thing I would say is there are times where, something might bother me, and I really have to think about, like, is this something I need to bring up, or is this just something I need to let go? And a lot of times it's like, this isn't the level of, like, let's talk about this. It's not a big deal. Let it go,
Yeah. I think on the flip side, I talked about a relationship that just never quite got repaired in a lot of respects because I didn't fully speak my mind. I think about another relationship that we had pretty significant conflict, but it was such a growth, right? Like I talked about you can be stronger because of it. And I feel like I grew as a person because I engaged in a healthy way, and that relationship grew stronger because we engaged in a healthy way. It was hard, but now we're several years on the other side of it, and this relationship is really strong because we did that in healthy ways together then. And so I look back and I'm able to go, this was actually one of the things that enabled me to grow in ways that now, the seat that I sit in, the role that I have, I'm dealing with conflicts, whether it's dealing with conflict within staff or dealing with conflicts within the church, and the ability to do that well now, I can look back on and go, well, I grew through that one that helped me to do this one better now, and that relationship is really strong, is really thriving today because of it.
Bringing it back full circle, conflict is inevitable. And hopefully this whole episode can be something that can help you guys navigate that. We have, you said a little bit ago, church staff, there's conflict on church staff, and within the church and businesses and families and everywhere. So hopefully you guys can pull a little something from this. So at the end of each episode, we have some banter time. And this week, it's like, Barry, it's your last one before sabbatical. Yeah. You pick the Barry banter spot.
I felt such incredible pressure. I'm like, I have to come up with the banter. I can't come up with the banter.
It's a lot of power.
You're the banter guy. So I thought this would be a great way for us to finish it all out, and that would be, let's power rank the preaching team. What do you think? Yeah, what do you think?
Let's go.
No, I thought about that. No, that's the thing. Is like we all know everybody loves
Right,
Craig.
that's
Craig's the
right.
funny
Yeah.
one, and my
Yeah,
ego
he's
couldn't
gonna-
handle it if we
right.
actually power rank the
Yeah,
preaching team.
I'd pick Craig,
We're not
right.
gonna do that. Everybody knows Craig's the
Yeah.
funny one. So we talked last week about sabbatical, and what it made me think of is sometimes when helping people sort of explore sabbatical as kind of a new concept, one of the things that I'll do is to say, well, think about your ideal sabbatical, right? If you could be anywhere that you wanted to be, if you could do anything that you wanted to do, if you could be with anybody you wanted to be with, if you could eat whatever you wanted to eat, what would that ideal sabbatical look like? Because then you can kind of go, okay, well, are there any little pieces of that, any glimpses of that I can actually build into my next one? And so to think about kind of your ideal sabbatical. And so as I was thinking about this, I thought, okay, I would want to be in the mountains in a place that's quiet and beautiful and has an amazing porch. And I remember, I haven't been to this place since I was in the 8th grade, but I went in the 8th grade with my grandparents to this little rustic cabin in Red River, New Mexico. It was nothing fancy, rough around the edges, but it had this great porch that overlooked, it was in the mountains and overlooked the mountain stream. You hear the mountain stream. That for me is one of the most peaceful sounds. I just love to sit and watch and listen to a mountain stream. So I would want to be at that little cabin with my family. But the great thing is my family sleeps like half the day. And so I would have all morning quiet to myself, sitting out on that patio, reading a book, drinking coffee, silence, other than the sound of the rushing stream and the birds and that sort of thing. So the half of the day would be kind of alone and in silence. And then after the family all gets up, we'd go out and kind of take a hike. We're not like a big hiking family necessarily.
You like to mountain bike.
The mountain biking. I knew this was going to come up.
Can't
That
help
was
it.
like 20 years ago, and I had a little bit of a mountain biking phase that didn't last very long, but somehow made it on the website. But yeah, just get out and walk together through the woods, kind of had that experience together. Share a meal that evening. One of the things we love to do as a family when we're like all feasting together, because it's food that everybody likes, is like do a big breakfast for dinner. And so I would do a big, massive breakfast for dinner for everybody. And then either the whole family would go and watch Star Wars together because it's Dad's sabbatical after all.
Ooh, yeah.
Or Kim and I would go and watch Ted Lasso together because if you're going to watch TV on Sabbath, then it
should be Ted
It should be
Lasso.
Ted Lasso.
You haven't thought about this, have you?
Yeah, I was like, you're
Well, you
really
made
a lot
me
of
think of the
details,
banter.
yeah.
I had to come up with it. So
I like it.
there's some pretty
Yeah.
specific things I'd like to have.
I don't know if mine's gonna be as specific,
Yeah,
but
that's
I got
all
a
right.
couple things. It would be beach, and it wouldn't be like. Although I do love the Jersey Shore, and I do just think it's a one way that paradise is communicated on or expressed on this earth. It wouldn't be the Jersey Shore. It'd be like the Virgin Islands or Turks and Caicos, something like that. Like just beautiful beach, perfect temperature, so it's not too hot, but it's about 80, 85.
God, that's perfect.
That's perfect temperature for me. That's not too hot. Oh, that's
Oh,
like
that's nice.
yeah,
It's
on the
hot.
beach. Oh no, perfect on the beach. Really good food, and so just fresh seafood, like oysters, so fresh that they're still like slightly moving.
Yeah,
That
doesn't
sounds-
that
that
sound
sounds
doesn't that
great.
sound good?
Yeah.
Isaac.
Oh, my stomach's,
You love
my
that,
stomach's growling.
right? So really good seafood, really good drinks. So you're on the beach, you gotta have some drinks with umbrellas in it.
Little umbrella.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Always need an umbrella drink. My best friend would definitely be there. A few of my other closest friends, but I also with same kind of thing. Like I want some alone time where I could just be alone. And then have my closest friends, some of my cousins, family members there. Not too many because that's a lot, but a handful of
dinner
like
party.
my closest,
Yeah.
people that just good food, good conversation, lots of laughter. That I think are my highlights. Yeah.
Now, are you cooking the food, or is somebody
No,
else doing the cooking?
this is served. Yeah. No.
Okay, good.
And it just like keeps coming,
Just
like
keeps coming.
course
Yeah,
after
right.
course,
I love
and
it.
all of is like the next course
love
is
it.
better than the first.
Oh, that's great.
I'm kind of in Barry's camp. In a couple ways. One, I want it to be cold, so I'd like the mountains. I'd love to bundle up. I'd love to be able to see some snow and have the family, with us. Have some family time. Go on a walk. But then, like, I gotta have sports in there somewhere.
Okay, yeah.
So I needed probably a good sports podcast to like walk and listen to. Preferably a sports game to just watch, but I don't have any investment into.
Okay.
So it'd probably have to be like non-basketball, like an NFL game or something that I can just sit down.
You don't have to ride the wave too much.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And I don't talk about it or anything. And then a meal that I spend time on cooking.
Yeah.
You know, smoking a brisket or something, but then cooking some sides. And there's just something about cooking a meal that takes time and that just brings me a lot of joy.
I think cooking a meal that is slow, simmering, smoking, that kind of thing is a perfect thing for Sabbath. You're not in a rush. You're not in a hurry. And it's filled with delight. So doesn't feel like work. It feels like
fun.
I'm spending time. I'm not in a rush, but the payoff is going to be great.
Yes.
Yeah.
And no notifications.
Yes.
So
yeah, no phone, no.
The watch is off.
Yeah.
The phone's off to
I
the
agree with
side.
that.
Check it a few times, but no notifications. But
So what you start to do then is sort of reverse engineer. Like if this is the ideal, is there a little glimpse of that I can build into the next one?
Yeah.
all right. So Barb, $70 on a brisket. That's what we're next Sabbath. That's what I
There you
gotta
go.
go by. But thank you so much. Thank you for listening, Barry. We'll see you every other week throughout sabbatical. If you didn't listen to last week's episode, we have pre-recorded a bunch of episodes so you will get your dose of Barry.
Got some mailbag coming up.
Yeah,
all
we
your
have
questions will
some
get
mailbag
answered.
episodes. We did a cancel culture episode to where we tried not to get canceled, and it was great. So you'll get a dose of Barry. We'll have a bunch of guests, and Barry, enjoy your time. We'll see you in August.
Thanks.